are. There we are. Perfect. All right, guys. So let us get started here. So it is just after 12:45, and this is lesson 2 of the heart. However, we have a few things that we need to talk about. So before we start going in through the lesson, I just want to talk to you about some things that are coming up. So a couple of things. First of all, our office hours are 10 to 12 every day of the week, except for the weekend. So if you have any questions, you can reach me through Zoom through that. I get a little ding, so then I can answer Zoom. So my face won't be on there, but I will be listening for the ding. Your first aid quiz is ready to go as of 6 o'clock tonight. So you are welcome to start writing it at 6 o'clock tonight. And you have until 6 o'clock on Friday to finish it. It's open book. You're not cheating if you're looking through your book. But you do have only 90 minutes to write it in. So be clear on that and follow the instructions. If you haven't signed into Moodle yet, you're going to want to do that right away because otherwise you're not going to have access to that quiz. First aid booklets are due Friday at the very end of the day, 11:59. So I've received them from a few of you, but lots of you I haven't yet. So make sure those are done. They were actually due on the 16th. So you've had quite a long extension. So let's get those done. Heart assignment was due at 12 o'clock today. So those of you who haven't got that into me yet need to do that ASAP. Those of you who had it into me by last night have already been marked, but I'll return them all back to you probably at the end of the day. I want to get everyone else's marked. You will have another heart assignment today. I should have that out to you by 5 o'clock today. So that's my goal. So you'll see that on Google Classroom, and that'll be due by 5 o'clock on Friday. Okay. You will have a heart quiz on everything we've been talking about with the heart, and that will be coming up on the Monday after spring break, and you'll have Monday through Wednesday to finish the heart quiz. Okay. I think those are all. Oh, the other thing, our next Zoom session will be the same time, 12:45 to 1:30 on Friday. So those are all the administrative things I wanted to talk to you about. I will post all of these on my website as well. So if you don't memorize these dates, they'll all be on there. So any questions from you, first of all, before we continue? Yeah, go ahead.
So to scan the first aid books, do you want it all in one PDF, or do you want it all in like 5 separate ones?
When you're scanning your PDF, it doesn't matter to me. Honestly, Keegan, whatever is easiest for you.
Okay.
Okay. All right. And let me get back to this here. Okay, any other questions, guys? All right, see no questions, we're going to move on then. Okay, so we have, share screen here. I just want to go back to the Heart 2 notes for 1 second. So in the Heart 2 notes, I added another slide. So this is something I just updated it. Have I updated it? It might not have. I will update that after our session is over. Let me just write a note to myself. Update Heart number 1. So these are the Heart number 1, and this is the 26th slide. So what I added here is I added a quiz that you guys can do. The little quiz, it's just a drag and drop for the parts of the heart. So it's a good way to practice learning the parts of the heart. And then I added a video on heart pumping. Now I'm going to try to play that video. I tried with my Block 1 class and it didn't work so great, but we're going to give this a shot again. So just bear with me and we will try to play that video. And all right, so let's just go like this and like this. Okay, I'm just going to pause there. Can you guys see this and hear this video? Just give me a yes or a no on chat. It did work. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Then I will keep playing this.
Your heart's right atrium. When the right atrium is full with blood, it contracts. The tricuspid valve opens, and blood is pumped into the right ventricle of your heart. This is called atrial systole. When the right ventricle is full with blood, the tricuspid valve closes. This prevents blood from flowing back into the right atrium. Full with blood, your heart's right ventricle contracts. Okay, I'm hearing that you guys can't hear very well. That's because I had my mic on. I am trying to get the volume up on this so you can hear a little bit better. Pulmonary valve opens, and blood is pumped into your pulmonary artery and onto your lungs. This is called ventricular systole. The pulmonary valve quickly closes to prevent blood from flowing back into the right ventricle. Oxygen-rich blood returns from the lungs through the pulmonary veins and has filled your heart's left atrium. Your heart's left atrium contracts. The mitral valve opens, and blood is pumped into the left ventricle. This occurs at the same time a new contraction is taking place in your heart's right atrium. When your heart's left ventricle is full with blood, the mitral valve closes. This prevents blood from flowing back into the left atrium. Your heart's left ventricle contracts, and the aortic valve between your left ventricle and aorta opens. The contraction pumps oxygen-rich blood into your aorta and onto the rest of your body. The aortic valve quickly closes to prevent blood from flowing back into the left ventricle. This occurs at the same time a new contraction is taking place in your heart's right ventricle. Meanwhile, your heart's atria is filled with blood, and the cycle continues. Okay, I'm just going to stop that share here. Just give me 1 sec. All right, and I will share our new PowerPoint. So as far as the heart notes number 1, I'll update that on my website. And then you'll have those links. And once you have those links, then you're able to watch that video again if you want to, a little bit higher. Let me just put my mic in so you can hear me a bit better. Watch that video again so you can hear
louder, and then as well, try that quiz, because I think the quiz will be helpful for you. All right, so now we'll just get this going here. All right, so we are starting on with heart 2. Okay, and just a quick double check here. Let me just slide this along. All right. It'll be Keegan's asking if we can share the video to Google Classroom. The Google Classroom, I'll have the PowerPoint, so just go through to slide 26 on the PowerPoint, and then you will be able to just click on it and watch it from home. Okay, can everyone see heart 2 on their screen? Just with a quick little yes or no. Okay, good. All right. So let us get going with this. I just need to get my little tools out here. There we are. Okay, heart 2. So just from Caitlin, Caitlin, you're free to be here. The email, I just had it in your Google Stream that we're doing a new time for our Block 1 group. So check your Google Streams always because there's a lot of information on there, okay? All right, so part 2. So what we need to learn about is we need to learn about our circuits. So we have a pulmonary circuit and a systemic circuit that we're going to learn about. So first we have the pulmonary circuit. Now, when we use this word pulmonary, what does that mean? What is that talking about? What do you think? Give me a chat. What's pulmonary? Pulmonary is lungs. So when we talk about pulmonary, we're talking about lungs. Okay. So when we're talking about the pulmonary circuit, we're talking about the circuit that's taking blood from our heart to our lungs and then back from our lungs to our heart. Okay. So that's what our pulmonary circuit is all about. So if we look over here, the heart pumps deoxygenated blood to the lungs to become oxygenated. Okay. So deoxygenated blood, so that's blood that's lost all of its oxygen as it's traveled to the cells of the body. So the cells got oxygen from the blood, and now the blood is deoxygenated. Not no oxygen, but less oxygen. So it's a darker blue color or darker red color. It's not actually blue. And then the lungs, the oxygen from the lungs gets provided to the blood. So then the blood becomes oxygenated. Okay. All right. So oxygenated blood is carried to the lungs through the pulmonary arteries. So I colored pulmonary artery blue as well to remind us that that's deoxygenated blood. When we use the word artery, and we'll talk about this with our next booklet when we talk about veins, arteries are our blood vessels that move blood away from the heart. So because the deoxygenated blood is being moved away from the heart towards the lungs, it's going through the pulmonary arteries. So arteries away from the heart. Both start with A, artery and away. Oxygenated blood is returned to the heart through pulmonary veins. So veins are the blood vessels that carry blood to the heart. Because these veins are coming from the lungs, we call them the pulmonary veins. Okay. All right. So on the next picture, we have our next image here. We have an image to label. So let's take a look at our image. I'm just going to move a couple of my little icons here. All right. So when I'm looking at this image, we're going to start with, what side did I decide to start with? Oh, we started with the left side, I think, here. Okay, so on the left side of the heart, so the first thing that has to happen is the blood, deoxygenated blood, has to get into the heart. Okay, now that's not labeled because that's not part of the pulmonary circuit, but what do I call, I'm just going to get my little spotlight out. What is this vessel called right here that's carrying the blood to the heart, the deoxygenated blood to the heart? Okay, excellent. So this vessel is called the vena cava. Now the vena cava that comes from the top of the body is called what? So we'll get someone to chat that in. The vena cava that's coming from the top of the body. Exactly, thank you. It's called the superior vena cava. And then the vena cava that's coming from the bottom of the body, what's that called? Thank you, the inferior vena cava. Good. Okay, so we have this deoxygenated blood. It's dropped its oxygen off at the body, and now it's entering the heart. Okay, so we're going to just look at the different parts of the heart here. So what is that first chamber? So we're looking at that very first chamber that the blood's going to go into as it that deoxygenated blood enters the heart. So what's the first chamber? So if someone can type that in. First chamber that the blood's going to go to. Not ventricle. This chamber right here. Yes. So it's the right atrium. Okay, so the first chamber the blood's going to go to is called the right atrium. Okay, so there's our right atrium. And then from the right atrium, it goes into the right ventricle. Okay, so we see the ventricle. If we take a look at the muscle around it, there's a lot more muscle in the right ventricle, right? So the blood is flowing from the right atrium through the tricuspid valve to the right ventricle. Now, from the right ventricle, that deoxygenated blood is moving out of the heart. So what do we call these vessels here where it's moving out of the heart? Okay, what do we call the vessels where that deoxygenated blood is moving through out of the heart? Not veins, Owen. That's right, pulmonary arteries. So these vessels, so away from the heart, arteries. So the blood's moving away from the heart, it's arteries. It's going to the lungs, so pulmonary arteries. Okay, so let's bring that up. So now we have pulmonary arteries. Okay, all right, so those pulmonary arteries are going to carry that deoxygenated blood to the lungs. So right here, we just have a label for lungs. Okay, so there's the lungs. And what we can see with the lungs is we see that these blood vessels, okay, so what was our pulmonary artery is all going to these teeny tiny little blood vessels, and those teeny little blood vessels is where that exchange happens. So that's where the oxygen from the lungs is going to actually enter the blood, and the carbon dioxide that was in the blood is going to go to the lungs so we can breathe it out. Okay, so I know that we haven't talked about it yet, but what do we call those teeny tiny little blood vessels? Does anyone know? Those of you who have taken Bio 20 or in the midst of taking Bio 20 might know that. I'm just going to get to my screen here. Oh, I can make this skinnier. There we go. There we are. Thank you, Cora. So those little teeny tiny blood vessels are called capillaries. Okay, so the capillaries, and I'll just bring that so we can see it. There we are. Okay. Now what we see here is the capillaries. They're going to gain the oxygen from the lungs, and then they're going to branch into, and we see it down here, pulmonary veins. So that oxygenated blood is going to go now back to the heart. Okay, so if you can type there, what is that first chamber that that oxygenated blood goes to in the heart? Not a ventricle. There we go. The left atrium. That's right. So it's the left atrium. And then from the left atrium, that oxygenated blood is going to pass through the bicuspid valve and then into the left ventricle. Now, the left ventricle is that last part here of our pulmonary circuit. So now we're getting into what's called the systemic circuit. But I would like you guys to tell me, where does that deoxygenated blood from the left ventricle go? What do we call that artery that it goes into? Can you write that down for me? From the left ventricle, what's the name of that artery? No, not pulmonary, because that would be the lungs, and we're done with the lungs. Okay, thank you, Susan. The aorta. So now that oxygenated blood is traveling through the aorta. Exactly. Okay. All right. So that's the pulmonary circuit. All right. So now we're going to look at the systemic circuit. So the systemic circuit, this is the one that's going to take that oxygenated blood from the body so the cells can be fed. Okay, so the cells in the body need to be fed. So oxygenated blood goes to the body where the blood becomes deoxygenated because those cells are going to collect that oxygen. Okay. Oxygenated blood is carried to the body tissue through the aorta. So from the aorta, that oxygenated blood's going to branch off into lots of different arteries to carry that oxygenated blood throughout the body. Once that blood loses the oxygen to the cells, it now becomes deoxygenated. And then that deoxygenated blood goes back to the heart through the vena cava. Okay. All right. So I have a little image here to help us with what this looks like here. And I think this one, I started on the other side. So let's get my little spotlight. Okay, so I've started this over here. So this is where the oxygenated blood, where we left off, the oxygenated blood enters the heart through the through the left atrium, goes through the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle, goes to the aortic valve, and then from the aortic valve goes into the aorta. Okay. So goes into the aorta. So that's the biggest artery in our body. Now that aorta branches off. So part of the aorta is going to branch to feed to the, part of the aorta is going to branch to feed to the head and the arms. So those, that tissue can be fed with oxygen and nutrients and lose its waste. And then we have over here the descending aorta, and that's going to allow for the cells of our internal organs and our legs, so the lower parts of our body, to get oxygen and nutrients. Okay. So once it's dumped off that oxygen and nutrients, this deoxygenated blood now has to make its way back to the heart. Okay. And it makes its way back to the heart through, and I already put this up, so you saw this already. It goes back to the heart through the vena cava. So the superior vena cava here, that's carrying from the top part of the body, so like the head and the arms, and the inferior vena cava is carrying that deoxygenated blood from the internal organs and the legs. And then that all dumps into this little chamber right here. And I'd like you guys just to tell me again, what's that little chamber that deoxygenated blood gets dumped into? Okay, what do we call this chamber here? Awesome. So we have the right atrium. So that's our chamber that deoxygenated blood gets dumped into. And then we're back into the pulmonary circuit where that blood can become oxygenated. Okay? So we'll just look at this next slide here. So what this slide is just a summary of what we just talked about. So we're looking at the systemic and the pulmonary system all together. So we'll start with the pulmonary system. And we see that pulmonary system is the one that's connected to the lungs, right? So our pulmonary is connected to the lungs over here and the lungs over here, okay? And then I made a little text boxes here. So the pulmonary circuit, oxygen's coming from the lungs and going to the blood. So these little arrows are referring to what's happening with the blood. So the oxygen in the pulmonary circuit from the lungs to the blood, and the carbon dioxide from the blood to the lungs, because then once it's in the lungs, we can breathe that out because it's a waste product, okay? If we look at our systemic circuit, so this is what's going on here, okay? So we see that the oxygen is leaving our body cells, okay? Leaving the blood to go to the body, and the carbon dioxide is leaving the body cells to go to the blood. So the arrows again are pointing to what's happening with the blood. And we see that that's happening in the upper part of the body, the head, the chest, the arms, and then it's happening down here, the lower part of the body, right? So where our abdomen is and our legs. All right. All right, so that is the pulmonary circuit and the systemic circuit. So before we continue with that, or with our next thing, any questions about that? Okay, I don't see any questions. So one thing we want to understand is that our blood flows kind of in a figure eight, right? So we have this figure 8 that we're doing with our blood. Blood comes in, goes to the lungs, circles back, goes to the heart, goes to the body, goes to the lungs, and we have this little figure 8 that our heart is always pumping the blood with. Okay? All right, so that's part 1 of our lesson for today. Part 2. Part 2 is to learn about the cardiac cycle. Okay? So the cardiac cycle is one cycle of the heart contracting and relaxing. So when we think about that, I'm just going to, better not do that. When we think about, let me just see what I'm doing here. Cancel that. Just going to open me up. When we think about the cardiac cycle, what we want to imagine, I thought I could make this bigger. What we want to imagine is what we have is the heart, and it's has to relax and then contract and then relax and then contract and relax and contract. And that's the cycle it makes. Okay. So when it contracts and then relaxes and then contracts, one cycle of it contracting and relaxing is called a cardiac cycle. And it takes just under a minute or just under a second, which makes sense because we have more heartbeats in a minute than we have seconds in a minute. So about 70 heartbeats per minute when a person's at rest. Okay. 2 terms we need to understand when we're doing this. So the first term, before we can really talk about cardiac cycle, is systole. Systole means contraction of the heart muscle. Usually when we just use systole, we're talking about ventricles because they're the bigger muscle and they're pumping the blood away from the heart. Okay. But we can refer to atrial, we can refer to atrial systole and ventricular systole separately because we know that the atria have to contract to force that blood into the ventricles, and then the ventricles contract to force the blood into the arteries. Okay. The other word is diastole. Okay. So diastole is when the heart relaxes. So again, usually when we say diastole, if we just use that word, we're kind of just talking about what's going on with the ventricles because they're the bigger muscle. But we can talk about diastole of the atria or diastole of the ventricles. So atrial diastole, when the atria are relaxing and they're filling up with blood. Ventricular diastole, they're relaxing and filling up with blood. Okay. All right. So let's go on to our next slide here. The steps of the cardiac cycle. So the first step is that the atria has to fill with blood. Now remember, we're talking about the left and right, left, filling with blood, because these are all happening simultaneously. The left and the right work as a team. Okay, so the atria is filled with blood. Atrial systole. So now the atria is contracting. The right atria contracts, forcing blood into the right ventricle. The left atria contracts, forcing blood into the left ventricle. Okay, so when the right atria contracts, it's forcing the blood through the tricuspid valve. And when the left atria contracts, it's forcing the blood through the bicuspid valve. Okay, so they're pumping together and that blood's going into the ventricles. We have atrial diastole. So now the atria is relaxing, starting to fill with blood again. And as that's happening, we have ventricular systole. So now our 2 ventricles, the right and the left ventricle, pump that blood. Okay, and a couple of things happen. So when the right ventricle pumps the blood, it's forcing that blood out of the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary arteries. When that left ventricle is pumping the blood, it's forcing the blood through the aortic valve and into the aorta. Okay, so the blood gets forced into the arteries. But because of that, the atrial ventricular valves close. That huge pressure now that we have in the ventricles causes the atrial ventricular valves to close. We get this, bam, they close. And when we're listening to a heartbeat through a stethoscope, that's that lub sound. So on the right side of the body, The valve that's closing is the tricuspid valve, and on the left side of the body, it's the bicuspid valve. Okay. Then we go into ventricular diastole. So this is when the ventricles will fill up with blood from the atrium again, or atria again. Now, because it's relaxed, what that's doing is it's now causing those semilunar valves to close. And when they close, we get a dub sound. And that dub sound is that second sound that we're going to hear in a stethoscope. So in a stethoscope, we hear lub dub, lub dub, lub dub. Okay, and those are the valves closing. So the semilunar valves close. So on the right side, that would be the pulmonary valve, and on the left side, that would be the aortic valve. Okay. All right, so if we take a look at the cardiac cycle in this image here, so if we look here, the diastole, so relaxing, our atria is filling with blood. So we see the right atria filling with blood, and we see the left atria filling with blood. Okay. And now we see atrial systole. The atria are contracting. So they're contracting, forcing blood into the ventricles. Then we see ventricular systole. The ventricles are contracting. And when they contract, they're forcing blood into the arteries. So on the right side, forcing blood into the pulmonary artery. On the left side, forcing blood into the aorta. And as they contract, they're forcing these atrioventricular valves to close. So the one here on the right is the tricuspid valve, and the one here on the left is the bicuspid valve. And then I have one more little image to show you here. So this is just about the sounds that are being made. So the first heart sound, the lub, so that's showing us the closure of the atrioventricular valves. Okay, so we're closing the atrioventricular valves. So atrial systole, so that's the contraction of the atria, forcing the blood through the atrioventricular valves, so the tricuspid valve and the bicuspid valve. And then the ventricles contract, and they're slamming shut the atrioventricular valves through that process because the blood's forced to go this way. So the blood tries to go that way, but the way when the pressure backwards on it on the valves causes the valves to close. Okay. Ventricular systole, so it's contracting and it's forcing the blood through the semilunar valves. So we have the pulmonary valve here going to the pulmonary arteries, and we have the aortic valve here going to the aorta. Then when the ventricles go into diastole, that causes more pressure to force on the outside of the valve, causing them to close. So our semilunar valves slam shut. So this one, the pulmonary valve, and this one, the aortic valve. Okay. All right, I'm just going to go back here. I also have a little video that I linked to kind of help you with the cardiac cycle. So there's a link on the on this, which is posted to your website that you can look at. Okay, so this is just part of that PowerPoint. Okay, before we move on to the next one, I'm just going to throw out there, are there any questions about this? Okay, so everyone's understanding, it's all making sense? That's what Oh, and you're on your own there, buddy. All right, so we are going to move on here to our next and last section. So our first section we covered today, our first section that we covered today was on pulmonary and systemic circuits. Our second section was on the cardiac cycle, and now we're moving into cardiac output. So this is our last section for today, okay? So let's move on. Okay, so cardiac output. Cardiac output, there's two terms that we need to know for that. So the first one is heart rate, and the second one is stroke volume, okay? So if we think about heart rate is the number of heartbeats per minute. So how many times your heart beats every minute, okay? So for us, our resting heart rate, right? So our heart's beating, atrioventriculars, ventricles, and on and on and on. our heart beats, so lub-dub, 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 70 times a minute as a resting heart rate. That's a typical resting heart rate, okay? It increases with physical activity and stress. Well, the more you run around, right, the more your cells need oxygen and nutrients in order to produce energy. So we need an increased heart rate to provide them with that. When we have stress, part of how our body deals with stress is to try to give ourselves more energy so we can handle whatever situation that we're dealing with. So our heart rate will go up with stress as well. Okay. Stroke volume, that's the volume of blood that leaves the ventricles with each heartbeat. So every time your heart beats, okay, so every time those ventricles are forcing the blood into the arteries, stroke volume is how much blood is leaving the heart during that time. Okay, so every beat, that's our stroke volume. Okay. When we have a stronger heart muscle, we have a stronger stroke volume. So if you're someone who does a lot of cardio, right? So you're exercising your heart a lot. Your heart is mostly muscle. So just like when you go to the gym and you lift weights, you start to gain muscle. When you do lots of cardio, your heart will start to get stronger. And every time it gets stronger, that means when it beats, it's forcing more blood through it. Okay? So the stroke volume gets higher when we are more fit. And it's not as high when we're less fit. Okay? All right. Next slide. So that brings us to, athletes have a higher stroke volume. One thing to kind of think about with that, so if we talk about some of our people that have been, astronauts that have been in the International Space Station, when they come back down to Earth, their stroke volume has decreased quite a bit because their heart is a little weaker. Because when you're in space, your heart doesn't have to work nearly as hard to get blood through your body because you don't have the same amount of resistance as we would here on Earth because they're in a microgravity environment. So when they come back to Earth, their heart rate's probably going to go up because they need it to be beat more to get the same amount of blood through the body. Okay. All right. So cardiac output. Cardiac output is the volume of blood pumped out by the ventricles every minute. Okay, so it's how much blood is pumped out every minute. So average for a human male is about 5 liters every minute of blood, and for a female is about 4.5 liters of blood. Okay, now that's going to vary depending on your size, so that's just the average. So when we think about what our cardiac output is, it depends on our heart rate and our stroke volume. That being said, two people that have a similar number of cells in their body, so a similar mass, need to have the same cardiac output so their cells get the same amount of nutrients and oxygen. Okay? So when we try to figure out cardiac output is heart rate multiplied by stroke volume. Now, I'm not going to make you do this calculation, but what this means is, I'll go back to this here. What this means is because someone who has the same number of cells in their body, so the same mass needs to have the same cardiac output, if we have an athlete who's got a really strong heart, their stroke volume is going to be a lot higher because they pump out a lot of blood with every time their heart beats, whereas their heart rate then can be lower. It doesn't have to beat as much because every time it beats, it pushes a lot of blood out of the body, or out of the heart rather. Whereas someone who is less active and doesn't have as strong a heart, they have a lower stroke volume, which means their heart rate has to be higher to compensate for that so they have the same cardiac output. Okay. All right, so people with the same body mass must have the same cardiac output because all their cells need to be fed. Okay. So they require the same amount of blood to go to the same amount of tissues. All right. So now let's take a look at this next one here. We consider two individuals with the same body mass. And what I would like you to do on the chat here is just fill in that blank for me. So stroke volume. Same body mass, the stroke volume will be higher for the athlete or the couch potato. So just answer that question for me. Okay, awesome. Stroke volume is going to be higher for the athlete. They've got a stronger heart because they've been exercising that muscle. Okay, so every time their heart pumps, they're going to end up with more blood going out of their body. Okay, so that would be our answer that I just said. So the athlete has a stronger heart muscle, and therefore the ventricles pump more blood. Okay, all right, let's try another one. Two individuals, again, with the same body mass. The resting heart rate is higher for, so I want you to indicate whether it's the athlete or the couch potato. All right, so I've got a lot of you saying couch potato. Exactly. Now, anyone want to jot down a sentence to tell me why the couch potato would have a higher resting heart rate? Right, so the athlete's heart muscle can pump out blood more, so it doesn't need to beat as much to get the same amount of blood out. Where the couch potato, every time the heart contracts, not as much blood comes out. And if not as much blood comes out, then they're going to have to, their heart has to pump more. And one thing we want to consider is that from the time you are a teeny tiny size of a grain of rice, so 3 months after you're conceived, your little teeny tiny primitive heart already starts beating, and it continues to beat until the day you die. So what that means is if we want to maintain that heart and keep it beating for us, we want to exercise it so it doesn't have to beat as much, right? So the more we exercise and the more we get cardio, our heart doesn't have to beat as much. So we're actually putting less strain on our heart. Okay. All right. And then lastly here, I just have a link, another link. Oh, no, I don't. One more. I forgot about this. Okay, so I would just like you to answer my little question here. Who is the athlete? So based on the information that we see on the screen, so we see they must be the same size because they have the same cardiac output. So who's my athlete? All right, so I'm seeing lots of people saying it's Lee. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so Lee is my athlete because his heart has more muscle and pumps more blood with every contraction. So we can see by looking at his stroke volume, he's got a much higher amount of blood that's going out with every beat. So his heart rate doesn't have to be as high. So a resting heart rate of 50, that's like elite athletes, like Olympic athletes. They have a very low resting heart rate because their heart is so strong. Okay. All right. So our last slide here is just a link to a crash course about the heart. So this might be valuable for you guys to watch as well. Just to keep yourself learning this. So I will make a post today a little bit later as soon as I'm done creating your worksheet for the second part of the heart. So you will have a worksheet. That worksheet will be due on Friday. And you want to be working on your first aid stuff and getting that all done. And just to reiterate what I said earlier, as far as submitting your first aid stuff, whatever's easiest for you with how you want to submit it. So if you want to just take a picture of every single page and send that all to me, that's fine, because I can easily put that into a PDF form anyway. All right. Okay, so that being said, let me get this open here again. Any questions? Okay, you can go off your mic or on your mic and ask me a question too if you have one. I'm happy to answer questions.
So our final or that we're writing for first aid, is it open till Friday?
Yeah, it's open till 6 o'clock on Friday.
Okay.
Yeah, so it opens today at 6 at night and it'll be
Mhm.
open until Friday at 6.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Does it matter whether someone's athletic or non-athletic? Does that affect their strokes per minute or their the amount of liters that is passed through the body per minute?
No, that'll be the same.
Okay.
Yeah, so the cardiac output will be the same. Any other questions? Caitlin's asking where to find the new chat times. I posted that. I'll post it again today. So I'll post that. So block 1, I just haven't posted anything for block 1 or 2 yet, or 3 yet today. I'll do that a little bit later. I posted on the streams for Google Classroom. So you'll have to look at your streams. It's a fairly long stream, so you'll have to click on that and read it. Any other questions? Okay, seeing no questions, I will sign off. Remember, I do have office hours from 10 to 12 every day, and I will see you guys again for block 3 at 12:45 on Friday. So have a great rest of your day, guys.